Chapter 25. Gretel leaned her hip against the kitchen counter as she finished the last of her coffee. Although she had only been Patrick and Isabel as leader for 3 months, the wing of the house she was in was much too quiet with them gone. She didn't like the fact that the only sound she heard around her was the ticking of the clock. Alexander had extended an offer to her to come have supper with his clan. Of course his offer came out like an order because he was a leader and rarely asked anyone to do anything. Naturally she had declined the offer because she knew it was a bad idea to be alone with Alexander when she couldn't seem to control her responses to him. She couldn't understand how Alexander had such control over her emotions. One look at him and her legs went to mush, and her heart tried to take over her body. Her highly trained mind was the only thing that kept her from throwing herself on top of Alexander. No, she decided as she placed her cup in the sink. It was best to stay far away from Alexander. The knocking on the door that connected the west wing to the rest of the house stopped Gretel in mid-stride. Hesitantly, she waited, wondering if she had just imagined the knock. Then it came again. Although her heart wished it was Alexander on the other side of the door, her mind knew by the strength of the knock that it was him, figuring that Alexander probably wouldn't let danger waltz through his house to get to Gretel. Gretel opened the door after the third knock. "Cecilia," she said when she saw the beautiful woman outside her door. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, everything is fine," Cecilia answered. "Well, come in," Gretel said, moving to let Cecilia enter. Cecilia shook her head. "While you are staying here, this part of the property has become your clan's property. Alex would not take kindly to me going to another clan. But you, on the other hand, can come over here, since she likes Cecilia and wouldn't mind the company." Gretel shrugged and left her side of the property line. "There are so many rules to your whole culture," she said to Cecilia. "How is anyone supposed to learn them all?" "Well, there aren't that many people who come into the Lycan world. Usually you're born into it, and you learn the rules while growing up. You don't seem to have learned them very well," Ivan said as the 2 females moved down the hall towards them. He pushed himself off the wall and wasn't surprised when Cecilia's heart skipped a beat, as his voice and her blood pressure skyrocketed as he neared her. "Otherwise you would have asked for my name already." "Beat it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," Cecilia said. "And leave you alone with a leader who is not your own?" he asked with mock sincerity. "That would be foolish of me." Cecilia ignored the man. "He doesn't think that you would hurt me," Cecilia assured Gretel. "He just thinks if he stays next to me the entire time that somehow I'll cave and ask him for his name." "Because you're his mate?" Gretel asked. Cecilia laughed at that. "Yeah, he is," she said as she looked over at Ivan. This time it was his body that reacted to her. She couldn't help but smile at him. "And HE's not half bad for a mate." "Hey, Gretel," Ivan said, wrapping his hand around Cecilia's arm. "Can you give us a second really quickly? You can head straight through those doors. Cease will be with you shortly." Gretel ever liked being the third wheel in the human world. With the way Ivan and Cecilia were attached to each other, Gretel could only assume being the third wheel would be worse. She went through the doors that Ivan had indicated. If Gretel hadn't known Alexander as well as she did, she might have been surprised by the room she walked into. But the wealth around her didn't shock her. She was stunned by the wealth because she still wasn't used to the size of the house. But she was shocked by it. The room had 2 walls of windows framed in with dark wood that extended to stories. The balcony overlooked the large room where the black grand-sized piano looked like a toy and dollhouse, and the sofas looked like nothing bigger than a scrap of paper. But whoever decorated the room knew exactly what they were doing. Gretel noticed as she moved over to the sofas. Although the room was large and domineering, the sofas had been placed in such an arrangement as to create an intimate area. "You can sit," Alexander said when Gretel had only moved behind the couch and rested her hands on the back. Startled by the sudden noise in a room she thought she was alone in, Gretel spun around, her hand flying to her throat to calm herself down. "Ivan said I could come in here," Gretel offered. "I know you're a leader of your clan." which normally means you wouldn't be allowed on my property unescorted. But the circumstances are different in this case. As your protector, my house is completely open to you, and your job as protector supersedes anything else. Greta asked, running her finger along the pattern on the sofa. Yes, Alexander said. Greta moved around the sofa and took a seat. What happens when I leave Western Prep? Well, since you lost the privilege to your car, you'll usually be with me or another of my clan. That's not what I'm talking about. What if I don't come back to teach at Western Prep next year? Is your protection duty over? Are you planning on quit? Alexander asked in lieu of answering the question. Greta heard the disgust quote Alexander's last word. Apparently quitting was the word that Alexander used often. No, but that doesn't really answer my question. When does your protection end? I mean, what will happen when I get married? I don't think my husband will be very happy if you keep popping up to make sure I'm okay. Husband, Cecilia said as she walked over to the sofas. She looked at Alexander. Haven't you told her yet? Sissy, Alexander said, stopping the rest of her conversation before it happened. He did not want Cecilia breaking the news that Greta and Alexander were mates. Greta looked from Alexander to Cecilia and back to Alexander. Told me what? You've been invited to dinner, Alexander said as if this had been what Cecilia had been hinting at. It should be ready in just a few minutes. I teach middle schoolers and high schoolers, Greta said. She twisted a strand of hair between her fingers. I can spot a change of subject faster than you can think of them. Don't pretend that the supper invite was what I don't know about. I want to know what you haven't told me. Alexander leaned against the wall and crossed his arms over his chest. You may work with middle schoolers and high schoolers, but I work with Lycan leaders, and most of them are more terrifying than you. Most of them. Pushing himself off the wall, Alexander moved to stand over Greta. Yes, most of them. There are a few weak, world leaders out there. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Kishut's enthusiasm. I do have to say that every leader, aside from you, gives me the respect my reputation has earned. He held his hand out to Greta. It's time to eat. He wrapped his large, strong hand around Greta's delicate hand and pulled her to her feet. Once he had her on her feet, Alexander figured he may as well pull her into a hug. As his arms wrapped around Greta, Alexander felt the electricity spark between them. It was no mystery to him that Greta was his mate. As for what Greta knew, he could only assume that she was at a loss for how she was feeling. Humans didn't react with their significant others like Lycans did. Get a room, Cecilia mumbled. Ivan tugged on Cecilia's braid. We could get a room, if you would just ask for my name. And it's time for supper, Cecilia said loudly. She glared at Ivan. Greta moved away from Alexander, quickly before she jumped him then and there. The thought of what she wanted to do with Alexander had her blushing fiercely. The fact that she had thought about jumping him even with Ivan and Cecilia in the room only increased the shade of her blush. Alexander chuckled. Well, we shouldn't keep supper waiting. Supper, Greta found out, was in the room adjacent to the grand room they had been in. Greta had expected supper to be as grand as the room she had been in, but it was an intimate affair with just Alexander, Ivan and Cecilia. The food was delicious and the conversation was easy. Hey Alex, Cecilia said. I need to fly to New Hampshire tomorrow. I have a meeting that I can't do over the internet. Alexander nodded his head. Ivan will take you. Cecilia rolled her eyes. Just because you keep throwing the two of us together doesn't mean that I will be asking him for his name. Why don't you want to be Ivan's mate? It's not a matter of choice. Ivan said. She is my mate. We don't choose our mates. She has no say in the matter. Well, I do have a say in the matter because up to me whether or not I want to be bound to you, Cecilia said with a laugh to Ivan. Then she gave Alexander a sideways glance. And you throwing us together isn't going to work. Do you want to go to New Hampshire? Alexander asked. I cannot take you because, well, I have other responsibilities. he said without saying that Greta was his other responsibility. If you want to go, you must have Ivan with you. Why? Cecilia glanced up at a question she had very rarely heard in her culture, and never when it was directed towards Alexander. Leaders didn't explain their decisions. Alexander, she doubted, had even been questioned before. Alexander looked perplexed for a moment. If it had been any other Lycan who had questioned him, Alexander would have showed his displeasure in a very physical way. But it was Greta who had asked him. He sighed and did something he had never done before. He explained himself. It isn't safe for females to be on their own. I require a male Lycan to be with any traveling female. Greta raised a brow. Not safe. I've been traveling since I was a kid. It's not that dangerous. I know you may have been alive when Oliver Wright was flying the first plane, but there has been giant strides since then. It's not that, Alexander said. The traveling isn't the danger. The danger comes from rogue Lycans who want our women. My woman, Ivan put in. I wouldn't let her travel alone because I don't intend on losing my mate. So Alexander said, once more taking over the conversation. Usually the leader or the second travels with our women. Immer leader? Greta pointed. I could go with Cecilia. That would be amazing, Cecilia said. Oh, do let her come. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Finally, I would have someone to go shopping with. Men are the worst shoppers. Sissy, in not letting the person going to protect you be a human. And a female human at that. No, you go with Ivan. Cecilia smiled. Fine, but I think Greta should come with us. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I never get to go shopping with someone who doesn't roll their eyes at me the whole time. She said the last part pointedly at Ivan. It takes you 8 hours to pick out a dress. I had to find the one that teased you the most. She smiled at the way Ivan's body reacted to the memory of the dress she had chosen. She turned to Greta. Please come with. The meeting won't take long. Then we can stop in New York and go shopping. Greta shook her head. I don't have either a ticket or the money to get a last-minute ticket. We're taking Alex's jet. Cecilia said. You won't need a ticket. You have a jet? Greta asked, looking at Alexander. You seem surprised. Alexander replied with a laugh. Have you seen my property? My cars? What makes you think I would fly with? Humans. Greta supplied. Can she come? Cecilia asked, breaking into the conversation between Greta and Alexander. Alexander shrugged a shoulder. I don't mind. It will be up to Greta. I would love to go. Greta said, not really caring about going to New Hampshire, a place she had been to 3 times in her life for various functions, but just to travel on a private jet. She had traveled in every way possible, but she had never been on a private jet before. It was an experience that she would love to have. Then I guess that means you're going. Too, Alex, Cecilia said. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You male Lycans don't like your women out of your sight. Cecilia, that's enough. Alexander ordered. You will say nothing more on the matter until further notice. Do you understand? Yes, Alec. Do you have to come because you're my protector? Greta guessed. Although she was pulled to Alexander with a force she couldn't deny, she had no word to place with it. She knew that mates existed, but had no idea that a human could be the mate for a Lycan. At the moment, Alexander didn't want her to know the connection between the two. Certain, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. That she would bolt the moment she found out. Something like that, Alexander said, unwilling to lie to his mate. He would withhold information from her, but he would never outright to her. What time is your meeting? Sis Monday morning. Cecilia said, I want to leave tomorrow. Get a hotel to stay at and then be prepared for my meeting the next morning. Alexander turned to Greta. Can you be ready in such a short amount of time? Greta had to smile at the question. Living with her parents. She had moved several times with less notice. Although her parents were linguists, they had an adventurous side that had them taking jobs in any place so long as it was someplace different or exciting. I think I can manage, she replied. This is going to be so much fun, Cecilia said. Chapter 26. She wasn't having any fun, Greta thought as she power-walked through another crosswalk. Nope. Fun would not be the word she used to describe her current situation. Stopping for a fraction of a second, Greta casually glanced over her shoulder. They were still behind her. Having been in nearly every city of the world, Greta had met more than her fair share of ruffians, and she had, because of Sinke, been trained in the art of self-defense. But she still didn't feel like meeting up with the three unsavory characters that had been following her since she stepped off the subway in downtown New York. The men were still behind her, and Greta knew that she would have to lose herself in the New York crowds. But it was 3 a.m, and, despite all the slogans about New York being the city that never sleeps, the crowds were gone. There weren't even a goodly amount of cars on the road. It seemed to be just her and the 3 men. She rounded the corner of the building and added more speed to her walk, hoping to increase the distance between her and the men. For the quickest second she spared a thought of Alexander but immediately pushed it away. The situation she was in required all of her concentration. She could think about Alexander and his lack of protection once she made it safely to her hotel. A casual glance over her shoulder told her that the men were gaining on her. She had 4 more blocks up and 6 blocks over before she would reach her hotel. At the speed she was able to travel and the speed the men were keeping up, she wouldn't make it to her hotel before the men made it to her. She wanted to break into a run but didn't dare. The moment she tried running, the men would be on top of her. She had to appear confident and unafraid. Her quick pace, so long as it was a run, would appear normal in New York City. The men, with their longer legs, would eventually cover the distance between them. A glance behind her shoulder told her that eventually was going to be much sooner than she hoped. Greta reached into her purse and wrapped her fingers around her mace. She had carried the small canister for 8 years without ever having to use it. But she was figuring that stat was about to change. She quickly walked 1 more block up. There was an alley to her left that would cushion of her trek to the hotel, but it also left her the most vulnerable. She had to make a quick decision, because at her pace she would pass the alley, and she couldn't turn around. Deciding to make a run for it once she hit the alley, Greta turned just in time and sprinted. She heard a cry and promptly figured that the men had been surprised by her actions. Perhaps they figured she would stay out of the alleys at all costs. The dark figure that stepped out of the shadows in front of her changed her first thought about why the men shouted. They weren't surprised. They were alerting their partner in the alleyway. Perhaps the man had been there, hiding in the shadows, planning on taking her when she neared the hotel on the other side. Now he didn't need to wait any longer, because she had placed herself in his hands. Hey there. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm, the man said. Where are you running off to so quickly? Greta shivered at the sound of the deep voice in the silent alley. She wondered briefly if she should scream or try to run past the man. She settled for neither. The alley was too narrow for her to get by the man without getting caught. As for screaming, it was a useless act on her part. Unless she was ready to attack, she would save her screams for the best time. You got her. At the new voice, Greta glanced over her shoulder for only a second. The man in front of her was closer and therefore the more dangerous one, and that required her to keep her eye on his actions. And besides, the glance was all she needed to see the 3 men block off her escape route behind her. Most women wouldn't have come down the alley, the man in front of her said. Greta forced her mind to focus on the present instead of on the possibility of actions in the future. Fear would paralyze her, but planning would help her. She loosened the death grip she had on her mace can and took several small, but deep breaths. Her only option was through the man in front of her. If she could take him down, she could run to the other end of the alley. The man would cause a hurdle for the other men. giving her enough time to make it to the hotel. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. That was one giant if she was betting on. I don't want any trouble, Greta said, surprising both the man and herself with the confidence she heard in her voice. That's too bad, the man replied, because I happen to want lots of trouble. The men behind her laughed, alerting Greta to the fact that they were closing the distance between them. Slowly, they were closing the distance. She would have to act now if she had any hope of getting away. Not that her margin of hope was very large. Dropping her shoulders in a sign of submission, Greta focused on not listening to Stinke's voice telling her to never look like a victim. She needed to be able to get close to the man without inattention. Looking weak and frightened was the way to do it. She felt the heat from the man radiate through the cool night. She could smell the booze on his breath. She was close enough. Lifting the mace can, Greta sprayed it straight into the man's eyes. Instinctively, the man reached for Greta. His screams entangled with hers, and the suddenness of both had the other three men stuck in surprise. Having planned her route before attacking, Greta went into action. She pushed past the now blinded man who was fallen to his knees as the mace attacked his eyes. She ran, bolting for the hotel at a dead run. She could hear the men cursing her behind her. Instead of looking back to see if they were following her, Greta raced for the hotel, kicking off her ridiculous high heels to increase her speed. Now that she didn't need to pretend to not notice those behind her, she could take more action. She heard the thumping of the men's feet on the concrete sidewalk behind her. But she knew, without glancing behind her, that they were going to be too late. The stitch in her side kicked in just as she reached the hotel door. The automatic doors were shed open and she stepped in, already knowing the layout of the hotel. She bypassed the startled hostess behind the counter and bolted for the elevator. Luck was on her side as the elevator was already on the ground floor. Stepping inside, she punched the button for the 14th floor and slammed her fist into the door close button. She heard the men ask the worker where the elevators were. The softing alerted her to the fact that the door were closing. She breathed a sigh of relief as the doors shut before the men chasing her made it through the lobby. The fear of what had happened hit her so suddenly that her knees gave way before she was able to support herself with the wall. She fell to the floor. Tears threatened to fall, but she pushed them away as she pulled herself up using the railing alongside the elevator wall. She would fall apart later. After she was safely in her room, she still needed to make it into her room. She was sure who those men were, but she couldn't be sure that they wouldn't try to follow her up, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. She realized, the moment she stepped off the elevator onto the 14th floor, that she didn't need to worry about the men finding her before she reached her room. A different terror was awaiting her. Alexander, the very angry Alexander. Where were you? A very, very angry Alexander. Greta realized when she heard the quiet voice that he spoken. Her brain was working fine because a quick retort flew to the front of her brain. But she didn't trust her mouth to be able to say the words without trembling. Alexander pushed himself off the wall where he had stopped to wait once he heard the elevator start its ascent with Greta in it. He stalked over to Greta, his sheer presence pushing her back until she hit the elevators and had no place to retreat to. You will tell me where you... Instead of finishing his demand, he leaned closer to Greta and inhaled slightly. A new look of anger overtook his face. Why do you smell like pepper spray? Greta finally took several deep breaths. The stitch in her side increased as she breathed. Apparently she was out of shape. Listen, you will answer my question. She was about to tell Alexander not to call her by her full name, but Alexander's expression again changed. She had thought she had seen Alexander angry, but she had been wrong. Now he was angry. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Alexander called out. The word wasn't particularly loud, but it held a certain authority to it. And Ivan, despite being 4 rooms down and on the other side of a closed door, came as soon as Alexander called. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Take Greta inside. She will not leave the room until I let her. Greta rolled her eyes. Immerse. Alexander completely ignored her. You will tie her up if necessary, he said to Ivan. She is not to leave the room. Even though Greta was walking of her own accord towards Alexander's room, Ivan obviously didn't think that she was moving nearly quick enough because he took her by the arm to hurry her along. But it was fast enough. Just as Ivan and Greta reached the door to the suite, the elevator doors opened. No, Greta whispered when she saw 3 men step off the elevator. Although she hadn't seen them clearly on the dark New York streets, she was fairly confident that they were the 3 men who had followed her. Greta dug in her heels as Ivan tried to hurry her into the room. She had expected the men to react in the same way she did when they saw Alexander, slowly backing up until they could find a clean exit from the obviously angry man. But they didn't retreat. They paused, for only a second, and then they attacked. In full Lycan form. Stop, Greta shouted. She attempted to run towards Alexander, but Ivan physically picked her up with just one of his arms and dragged her into the room. He released her, but stayed in front of the door to prevent Greta from running back into the hall. Move. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Greta ordered. You may as well go sit down. Greta, Ivan said, I will not let you out of this room. Move. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Greta ordered again, since her order hadn't worked the last time. Greta added, I am a leader. You may not keep me in here. Ivan ignored Greta's threat. Alexander was Greta's, which gave Ivan more leeway with handling Greta despite her leader status. Sit down. Greta looked around the room. Where's Cecilia? She watched the question hit Ivan and knew she had one. With only his mate on his mind, Ivan left Greta in the room and bolted across the hall to the other room. Greta didn't wait. She left the room intent on helping Alexander. She should have known better. First off, she saw the 3 men change into Lycans, leaving her human frailty useless to fight them. But, and this was more important, she thought she would have to help Alexander. There was a reason he had the reputation that he did. He was not going to need the help from a female human. Greta stopped short outside the door. The 3 men she had been worried about would no longer make anyone worry. All 3 of them were down, and, Greta assumed from the order of each, they were dead. That last of the 3 was just changing from his Lycan form to that of the human who had followed her on the street. Only one Lycan stood. Growling, he turned and met Greta's eyes. Stalking over to Greta, he paused just shy of bumping into her. He shifted back to his human form and turned to look at Ivan, who had opened the door of Cecilia's room. Take care of those 3. See if you can follow that order. He turned back to Greta, effectively ignoring Ivan. Get in the room. She moved. First off, she had no choice. She had never heard so much power in someone's voice. And, probably more importantly, Alexander simply picked her up and brought her into the room. He released her and pointed to one of the chairs in the suite. Sit down. Sighing, Greta rolled her eyes and moved over to the chair. She sat down and looked for Alexander, who was no longer in the room. She heard the sink turn on in the adjacent bathroom and thought, for the briefest second, to go find him. The stitch in her side from running changed her plans. She had to catch her breath and focus on calming her nerves before gallivanting into the bathroom to demand the explicit attention from a man that looked like he wanted to kill her. Perhaps it was best for both of them if he calmed down a bit first. She rested her head against the back of the chair and took stock of what had happened. Her feet hurt from the run on the pavement, and she figured they would be sore for a few days, a price she would gladly pay to be alive. She tried to wrap her head around what she had seen in the hallway. The men who had been following her had been Lycans. They had transformed into Lycans in front of her eyes. She had seen Patrick in Lycan form, but he was a teenager and didn't have the power that a full, grown Lycan had. The three men could have torn her from limb to limb. Then there was Alexander. She thought he had an effect on her as a human. But when she saw him as a lichen, she had to found herself just thinking about it. If her knees hadn't already been weak from the race to the hotel, they certainly would have buckled at the sight of him coming towards her. Greta. Greta's eyes flew open at the sound of her name. Alexander had come back from the bathroom and was wiping his hands dry on the pristine white towel. She looked at him and noticed that he looked no less mad than he did when she had stepped off the elevator. Calmly, Alexander took a seat in the chair across from Greta. Although there was another chair in the room, Alexander wanted to be between Greta and the door. He laid the towel over the armrest. Where were you? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I am a leader, and I am your protector. He took a deep breath and took control of his temper. Seeing his mate step off the elevator when she should have been safe in her room, only to be followed by three lichens, made Alexander more than angry. It had him worried, and worrying was not an emotion he knew how to handle. For this conversation, my status as your protector trumps your status as leader. Do you understand? Greta nodded her head. She didn't really have a choice with Alexander between her, as the only escape route in the room, save for a dive out the window. Tell me where you were. I went to Times Square. Why, she cleared her throat. Well, the thing is, I highly suggest you don't lie to me. Alexander interrupted. Nor will you equivocate anything. So try again. Why did you go to Times Square? Greta fiddled with her fingers. I was going to lie. I just realized that I think I was tricked in order to get there. Alexander curled his hands into a fist. We are not getting anywhere with this. You will tell me everything that happened from the moment I dropped you off in your room and ordered you to stay there. I got a phone call, and he asked me to come meet him in Times Square. Who was the man that you went to meet that you thought it was okay to leave this hotel without me? Now Greta stopped talking. She bit her lip. She really should have thought through actions as well as this talk with Alexander. Perhaps she should have gone with Ivan into Cecilia's room. At least then she would have another lichen there to stop Alexander. I am not an infinitely patient man. You're just going to get mad. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Trust me, Greta, there is no way I can get any angrier than I already am. But now I no longer think the person I thought was on the phone was really on the phone. I think it was someone else. Margaret Klassen. It was Simke. And then hurriedly added, but now I don't think it was really him, because he was there. I think it was a setup. Simke. Alexander growled. What were you thinking? I was thinking he was my friend. Greta shot back. She was still in pain. Her feet hurt. Her side still hurt. Which was ridiculous because the stitch should have gone away. She didn't want to be interrogated by Alexander at the time. Just so you know, mister. Was low. I still consider Simke a friend. And there was nothing wrong with me going to see him. Except there was something wrong. Was there? Greta. Which is why I don't think it was him on the phone now. Greta said. And don't get mad at me. I didn't sneak out of the hotel. I simply left by the elevator. I would have known if you left. Alexander said. He had put Greta in the room next to his. Your scent would have let me know you were leaving. Which is weird in and of itself. Greta mumbled. Oh, I forgot. I had a cup of coffee before I left, which you said one time hid my scent from you. Coffee. At 11 at night. She bit her lip again and this time fiddled with her hair. Well, about that. Yes, Alexander prodded. He figured he was going to hear something he was going to like. The man, whom I now know was Simke, told me it was going to be a long night and told me to have some coffee before I left. Alexander closed his eyes for a brief sec to hide the fact that his eyes were black orbs. He forced himself to calm down. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing Krishut's enthusiasm. I'll make a deal with you. For the next 10 minutes, you have complete immunity. You can tell me everything about tonight, and I won't get mad. But only for 10 minutes. Anything I have to get out of you after that 10 minutes, you will be reprimanded for. Reprimanded. Alexander had forgotten that he was talking to someone in his clan. He had simply reverted to his leader status. Yes, Greta, if you force me to get the information from you after 10 minutes, you will be reprimanded. I am your protector. You don't listen to me, and that will never happen again. So yes, Greta, I will reprimand you if I have to. It is completely up to you. Are you ready to talk for the next 10 minutes? I will, so long as you know that it was C&K on the phone. I can't reiterate that enough, Greta said. Alexander nodded. He would handle C&K at another time. I left the hotel about 20 to midnight because I really thought I was going to meet C&K. I didn't think I needed to tell you or Ivan because I was going to be with C&K. And he certainly wouldn't let anything happen to me. So I got to Times Square and went to find C&K told me to meet him under. That's when I knew something was wrong. C&K was there. I knew I was late. But C&K would never have left before I got there. When I was younger and in Prague, C&K told me to always trust my gut. So I did. I got back on the subway to get here. The subway is just down the block from here, Alexander said. Hey, Greta said. These are my 10 minutes. Are you going to add extra minutes to my time if you're going to interrupt me? My apologies. Continue, she sighed.
But continue.
3 men were following me. At least I thought they were. The subway was nearly empty, and I couldn't stay on there or the men would catch up to me. So I got off before this stop. I was 15 blocks away from the hotel. You're down to 4 minutes, Alexander said when Greta stopped and didn't continue. I knew I had to get to the hotel, but the 3 men following me were gaining on me. So I chose to go down an alley to cut my distance in half. She saw Alexander's jaw clench at her decision, and she hadn't even gotten to the worst part yet. Some man was waiting for me in the alley. He cut me off, so I pepper sprayed him and then ran for the hotel. Then I met up with you. So there was a 4th man, Alexander asked. Greta nodded her head. I got him square in the eye, so I don't think he followed me like the other men did. If those were indeed the other men who were following me, there were, Alexander said. They had pepper spray on them, just like you did. I didn't mean for this to happen, Greta said. She was sweating. Her face was hot, and it was getting harder to breathe. I just figured that it was C&K. It should have been okay. Why didn't you tell me that you were heading out of the hotel? But Greta didn't seem to want to answer the question. He looked at his watch. You still have a minute. I know you don't like C&K, Greta admitted. So I knew you would say no. Of course he didn't like C&K. Alexander didn't like any man near his mate. And he didn't like the fact that Greta went to C&K over him. But the 10-minute immunity meant that he couldn't dream into Greta for her actions. He would have to give Greta some rules to follow if they were ever off the property again, starting with no drinking coffee. He paused, looked at Greta, and studied her. What? Alexander, Greta said, still with her eyes closed. She was trying to stop her head from spinning and willing her side to stop hurting. She was seriously out of shape if the stitch was still there after 20 minutes. I can feel you staring at me. You said you had coffee before you left. I was lying, Greta said as she fluttered her eyelashes to meet Alexander's intense stare. She could hear the accusing tone in his voice. I can smell you. Greta. Well, excuse me for perspiring after a near-death experience. A mere dash for my life. A man facing one pissed-off protector. That's not what I meant, Alexander said. If you drank coffee, I would not be able to pick up your scent. But I have it now. He watched her close her eyes again. This time he carefully looked her over. Had Greta lied to him? Did C&K really have something to do with the whole night? Greta, why are you holding your side? I am seriously out of shape. I got an ache in my side as I was running to the hotel. It still won't go away. Alexander moved off his chair and over to Greta's chair. He knelt down beside her. I want to see your side. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It's nothing. It hurts on the inside. It will go away. Your 10 minutes are up. Greta, I just don't know why you think I'm actually asking you to do what I say. I want to see your side. Something is wrong. Greta sighed heavily. It's nothing. See, she said, lifting up her shirt to show her side. Oh, she said. When did that happen? She traced the fingernail marks on her side. No wonder the pain won't go away. How did you know? Alexander pulled Greta to her feet. The only way I would be able to get your scent after drinking coffee would be if you were bleeding, since you were holding your side. I just made a guess. Go take a shower. I will have your clothes brought in here. I can just go back to my room. Alexander interrupted Greta with a laugh that showed no mirth. After tonight, I can't believe that you even bothered to suggest such a thing. You will be in here until we leave tomorrow. Swaying for a second, Greta held on to Alexander's arm until her head cleared. This discussion isn't over yet. Alexander kissed the top of Greta's head. Yes, it is. Now go take a shower. Chapter 27. Greta knocked on Alexander's office door, or what one of Alexander's men said was his office door. She waited for him to call her in before pushing open the door and stepping into the secluded office. Can I come in? Alexander. Alexander stood up as soon as Greta stepped into the room, the manners from a period long ago forcing his actions. I thought you were ignoring me. It had been for days since they had been back from New York, and Greta had forced herself to stay in her wing of the property and not find Alexander. The first 2 days she had kept herself busy grading all of her lessons and planning for the rest of the year. The third day had been near impossible, but she managed to stay away from Alexander. On day 4, she finally admitted to herself that she would not be able to last the day without seeing him. So she set out to find him. Well, you had been a jerk in New York. Jerk. Alexander had never heard the term applied to him. I am a leader. Greta, I deserve respect from you. Well, when you start treating me like a leader, I will start treating you like a leader. Sit, Alexander ordered, deciding to change the subject before he started down that path with Greta. I'm glad you came to find me. I was actually on my way to find you. We need to talk. That sentence sends terror through anyone's body when they hear it. Greta sat down, smoothing her skirt down as she crossed her legs. However, there happens to be things that I want to talk to you about. So this is good. Instead of taking his seat behind his desk like he normally would have, Alexander moved to sit in the chair next to Greta. He could feel his blood pressure even out as he neared his mate. He didn't like having Greta away from him for such a long time. If she had waited any longer, he would have gone to find her. He didn't like that she was on break. At least during school, he had seen her every day. Why were those men after me? Alexander was not expecting the question, so it took him a second to understand whom she was talking about. New York. Although it was only 4 days ago, it seemed as if years had passed. Leaning back in the chair, he rested his ankle on his knee. It's because you're a leader. Greta, so are you. Greta pointed out. They didn't go after you. Well, they didn't go after you until I brought them there. And they attacked you. But I've never seen anyone go after you. Alexander sighed heavily. Every clan has a leader. But not just anyone can become a leader. Aside from having lycans willingly hand over their allegiance to someone, the only way to become a leader is to take over a leader's clan. Since most lycans don't just hand over their allegiance, the easiest way to get a clan is to kill a leader and take his position. And don't take any offense at this, that you, my dear, have the easiest target on your back. Greta felt the involuntary shiver creep up her back. I think I liked it better when you sugarcoated things around me. Yeah. Too, and then you left the hotel and put yourself in danger. Alexander reminded her. Now you get the truth. Completely uncoated. How many people want to become leaders? Greta. Alexander started. realizing when he heard her fear that he probably should have sugarcoated a bit of what he was saying. Greta interrupted him. How did they even know I was there? How did they get my phone number? Who in their right would want to be a leader with this hanging over their heads? She got very quiet and turned to look Alexander squarely in the eyes. How did you become leader? He broke into a wide smile. My father died. Died? Greta asked accusingly. Of natural causes, Alexander assured her. I didn't become a leader in a nefarious way. Although I do allow rumors of the kind to circulate. You let a lot of rumors of your clan circulate. I thought Lycans didn't believe in lying. It's not a lie, Alexander said. Other Lycans know not to mess with my clan because I take my responsibility seriously. I don't not let others touch what is mine and get away with it. It has left me with a reputation of sorts. One that you don't deny. That's unnecessary, he replied. Because I would take measures to that length if I needed to. No one would doubt that. So how many people want to become leaders? Greta asked, reverting back to her first question. Do I have to worry about someone attacking me here? Maybe Ivan wants to become a leader. My men would never attack you, Alexander said. You are completely safe here. As for gallivanting away from my protection, I don't advise it. My men are here to protect you. Even Ivan. Greta stood up and moved to the large windows overlooking the front of the property. She could see in the distance a lone car traveling parallel to the property. So, let's say after these 6 months are over, and I haven't accepted anyone else's food and drink, and Patrick and Isabella have asked their fathers for their leadership again, would I no longer be a leader? It's an unusual case. Most leaders die before handing over their clans. But Nick has assured me that you will lose status once the children are back with their clans. Nick Lycoan, Alexander clarified, is leader of the Lycoan clan. Most people believe that is the clan we all come from. He is the one who makes up the laws for the entire Lycan culture. So, if this Nick guy says that I won't be a leader once Patrick and Isabella are back with their families, does that mean Lycans will stop trying to kill me? Truthfully, Alexander asked. He wanted to give Greta the opportunity to request a code of sugar at his words. No, you can lie to me, she said with not an ounce of sarcasm. Alexander looked Greta straight in the eye. And then he lied to her. Yes, they will stop trying to kill you. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. She didn't know if Alexander's answered as sugarcoating when he told her he was going to lie to her. She also didn't know if it was worth it to even know the answer. What am I going to do? She whispered, really to herself. She was unaware that Alexander had her softly whispered plea. Alexander clenched his jaw. I am your protector. Do not insult me by assuming that I can't protect you. She turned with a sigh. I'm not insulting you, Alexander. In thinking of the future, which you won't be a part of. She wondered for the briefest second why her heart hurt at those words. But it was true. Despite the way Alexander made her feel, she had no future with him. He was a Lycan. She was a human. He was a leader with his own clan. She was an oddity in the Lycan world. An oddity that wouldn't be there forever. When I leave Western Prep, I won't have you protecting me any longer. Then what? Are you planning on leaving Western Prep? Alexander asked. He would ignore the fact that Greta was unaware of her connection to him. Alexander would never let his mate walk out of his life. And never would he let her be in danger. But for now, he would let her assume that he was only keeping her on his property because of his protector status. I don't want to talk about it anymore, Greta said. She pushed the thoughts away. She pushed the idea of a future with Alexander away. She pushed everything away. She wasn't willing to stay at Western Prep only to watch Alexander move on with his life. She wasn't willing to watch another woman waltz into Alexander's world. Alexander stood up from his chair. With his Lycan ability, he was able to move with utter silence until he was standing behind Greta. He put his hands on her shoulders and felt the small jolt of surprise. He hid his smile when he heard her blood start rushing. He loved hearing her reaction to him. Did you ever think that perhaps I would like to know if you're leaving Western Prep? Her mind was so fogged with desire that it took her a good few seconds to process what Alexander had said. Why would you care? Keeping one hand on Greta's shoulder, Alexander moved Greta's hair off her neck with his free hand. Leaning down, he kissed her neck. His sensitive lips felt the pounding blood race through Greta's veins, and he was reminded again how fragile Greta was. The smallest amount of pressure was all it would take for him to mark her forever as his. He pressed his lips against her neck for a moment before pulling away from her. He released Greta's hair. I want to know what your plans are with Western Prep. Greta turned around despite the fact that the blush colored her cheeks a deep pink. How do you do that? Do what? Kiss me and then carry on a conversation. Alexander traced the blush on Greta's cheek. We'll talk about that later. Right now, I want to know about Western Prep. It took all of her strength to walk out of Alexander's arms. Moving to the chair, she sequestered herself in the safe place, sitting on her crossed legs. I don't know about next year. She thought of a suitable word to finish her sentence. Dangerous here. I'm starting to think I should have taken that job in Egypt. You will not, Alexander ordered. For a brief moment, he forgot that he was talking to Greta, a leader of her own clan. He even forgot that he was speaking to his mate. He simply ordered her to prevent her from leaving, just like he would have any member of his own clan. Well, Greta said, I don't think they're still hiring, so I think you don't need to worry about that. Tell me your plans about Western Prep. Well, I think the only reason I'm still teaching there is because I am the leader of 2 of the children. After they go back to their families, I'm assuming both men will demand the school let me go. She dropped her head in her hands. Without a reference letter from Western Prep, I will never get another job in the States, which means that, yet again, I will leaving overseas. She stood up, walking to the door with a newfound purpose. I need to start sending out resumes to schools overseas. Greta, do you really think resumes will work? She paused with her hand on the doorknob. She turned around in a flurry and rested her hand on her hip. You know, I've been thinking about that lately. I'm a very good teacher. I had schools lining up around the block to hire me. Then suddenly I lose my job and not a single school is hiring. Except Western Prep. At first I thought that I was just lucky. But now knowing what I know, I think they had something to do with that whole fiasco. We know how to get what we want, Alexander told her. He didn't bother pretending he wasn't aware of how Western Prep got Greta as a teacher. She was the best in her field. Western Prep would want nothing but the best. So why do you think your resumes will work this time? Well, first off, Western Prep will be looking for a way to get rid of me at William and Edward's insistence. And, you know, there might be a school that you likens won't think of bribing or threatening or whatever it is you do to get them not to hire me. I didn't personally talk to any of the schools. Greta, Alexander assured her, not bothering to lie about Western Prep tactics. You don't have to take it out on me. She narrowed her eyes. It was your kind. To my agent extraordinaire, Mylan Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And, if you had any connection to the school, I'm sure you would have been just as underhand in the whole thing. I'm sure I would. I never lose at anything. Alexander moved up to Greta. He saw her hand on the doorknob and slowly shook his head. Stay where you are, why? As I said just a second ago, I never lose at anything. So you won't make it out the door if I want you in here. Secondly, he flashed a smile that had Greta's heart racing. You have no reason to leave because I won't let you get a job at a school that I don't know about. She breathed out some word, although she wasn't exactly sure what it was. Alexander's scent drove her mind wild. She wanted to. She pulled open the door and was through before she allowed her brain to continue on that track. Despite her legs feeling like limp noodles, she made it nearly halfway down the hallway before she heard the office door open. Greta, we need to talk about Patrick and Isabella, Alexander said with the smile hidden off his face. Sometimes Patrick and Isabella were the only way he could force Greta into a conversation. He was surprised to see Greta stop. He also had to admit he was surprised to see frustration on Greta's face. Come back in my office. Greta crossed her arms over her chest, rested her weight on one leg, and glared at Alexander. Glaring at the incredibly handsome man was much easier when she was several feet away from him. His scent drove her wild. So did his eyes. She looked at the top of his head. We can talk out here. Leaders don't discuss policy in a hallway, Alexander said. Come back in. It'll be good, he promised with a sly smile. Fine. Knowing that she had to talk with Alexander about Patrick and Isabella. But you're sitting behind your desk the whole time. Is that understood? As you wish. Her stomach flipped. Her face burned. Are you coming? Alexander asked, holding his office door open. He expected Greta to request him to enter the room first, so he was taken aback when she sashayed over to him. Greta placed her hand squarely on Alexander's chest. She stepped closer to him until there was hardly a breath of space between them. Standing on tiptoes, Greta whispered, to come play at this game. She placed the shortest, just kiss on his lips. Finally she had Alexander frozen in his spot. With a small smile on her face, Greta slipped into the office and took the chair she had previously vacated. She looked over the back of the chair at Alexander, who was still standing at the door. Are you coming in? Shaking his head. Alexander finally moved. He slammed the door shut behind him and stalked over to his desk. You're playing with fire. You're going to get burned if you're not careful. Maybe you'll risk it. She crossed her legs, noticing that Alexander's eyes went to her legs. So he was as composed as he wanted her to believe. What about Patrick and Isabella? Greta asked. Even though she wanted to see how far she could push Alexander, Greta wisely decided to force the conversation to a neutral subject matter. Although Greta was his mate and every fiber of his body was pulled towards her, Alexander was a leader of his own clan as well as Greta as protector. The first meant that he was used to control all his emotions and actions. The second meant that he must protect Greta. Tomorrow you go back to school. Greta winced for a second. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Don't you like teaching? Well, yeah. Greta assured him, but he wants to start getting up early every morning again. And I have a bit more of a responsibility than just teaching. That's what I want to talk to you about. Tomorrow I will several of my men going to school with you. I have my car back, Greta reminded him. After Alexander took her car from her, Greta had refused to talk to him until she got it back. It took him 3 days to cave. Of course she had to promise him to tell him where he was going and never, ever meet with William or Edward alone. I know you have your car. One of my men will drive with you. Not you, she teased. He shook his head. He knew he was playing with fire and he got close to Greta. Being alone in a car with her would not be a good idea for him. One of my men will drive you. After school, you may take Patrick and Isabella home with you, but you will also take the same man back with you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. These are non-negotiable. Alexander interrupted Greta. If you do not agree to each and every one of these, I will take steps that you will not be happy with. He held up his finger when he sensed that Greta was about to tell him that she was a leader and was able to do as she wanted. I am your protector. If you expect others to treat you like a leader, then you will treat me like a protector. Like your protector. I don't have an issue with how others treat me. Everyone I meet treats me like a leader. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Because I'm your protector, and that supersedes your leadership role. Now do you want to hear the rest of the rules? Or do I lock you up? I would rather figure out how to become your protector so I can order you around. But go ahead with the rules. One of my men will drive with you both to and from school. I will also have several men for both children. Also, you're going to have to get used to seeing me at school, because for the next few days I won't be leaving you alone. Do you understand all of this? Well, I understand the rules, but I don't understand why you're changing everything now. Normally Alexander wouldn't bother to explain himself, but Greta was. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. A Lycan leader. Both Getz and Dimmick are going to be on the warpath tomorrow when they will be forced to hand their children back over to you. You will not worry because I won't let anything happen to you, but they will try to kill you to break the leadership you have over their children. For the first few days, I will be with you to deter any Lycans from the two clans from bothering you. Greta closed her eyes and leaned her head against the back of the chair. I can't wait for these next 3 months to be done, and I can give the children back. She opened her eyes, sighed, and looked at Alexander. Why do Lycans have such stupid rules? I did what I had to do to save Patrick and Isabella. Why can't their fathers understand that? Lycans are different than humans. Alexander sensed there wasn't anything else he could say to explain the situation to Greta. Unfortunately, even if I knew all of this would have happened before I contacted both leaders, I would have still wanted the children to go to their clans for Christmas. Alexander smiled. And you wonder why neither females nor humans are leaders in our culture. You're either soft-hearted. I assure you, as a compliment, which is soft-hearted, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The females or the humans? A little of both, but you are the mixture of both. I don't know one person who would take on the responsibility you did. Becoming leader was a huge risk. Wanting the children home for Christmas is not something a male leader would have done. You are amazing. Alexander's words had Greta blushing. Along with the blush came the thoughts of the fun she could have with Alexander. I have to go, Greta said. Quickly she bolted from the chair. They'll be waiting for your man tomorrow morning. Chapter 28. Greta glanced at the clock and cringed. She was running late. It didn't really surprise her. She always ran late on the first day back to school after a break. It was just so hard to get back onto a decent schedule. It didn't help that she was going to have Patrick and Isabella back. She didn't care much for the stress of making sure they were safe. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She did have Alexander promising to keep her and the children safe. She shivered once as she recalled her near escape in New York. She thought both Alexander and Sinke were exaggerating the danger she and the children would be in now that she was their leader. She thought they were just using that to get her to be under the control of one of them. But then she faced the true danger in New York. It was then that she realized without Alexander she wouldn't have lasted a week with the children. She didn't mind Alexander's protection. She just minded the fact that she had fallen in love with him. She couldn't ever have Alexander. He was a Lycan, and she was a human. She couldn't imagine Alexander bypassing a beautiful Lycan that was part of his world for her. A knock on the door jerked her from her thoughts. Come in, Greta called out as she slipped on her nude pumps, giving herself an extra 2 inches of height. Ivan opened the door, but he knew better than to cross the threshold. He was Alexander's second, but he knew his leader wouldn't take kindly if he found Ivan in Greta's wing of the house. Are you nearly ready? You're going to be late. If we don't leave soon. He pointed to his watch as if to prove his words. So sorry, Greta said. She snatched her cup of coffee off the counter. I hate the first day after break. Coffee? Ivan asked, catching the scent of the roasted beans as Greta moved up to him. Does Alex know? Greta flashed a smile at Ivan. Is there anything Alex doesn't know? She took a sip of the coffee. And I need the coffee. You would too if you were about to face a classroom full of middle schoolers the day after winter break. Although Ivan wasn't too happy about the use of coffee now running through Greta's bloodstream, he chose not to say anything about it. It wasn't really his place. Although he was Alexander's second and would normally outrank pretty much any other Lycan or human, Greta was a leader of her own clan, and that meant she shouldn't be questioned by other lower-ranked Lycans. Let me carry that bag for you, Greta. She was used to the morning routine now and gladly handed the heavy bag over to Ivan, who slung it on his shoulder without so much as a blink of an eye. She headed out to the garage where she waited for another normal morning routine. Ivan set Greta's bag in the backseat of the car, shut the door, and then to the only other lichen in the garage. Cecilia. Hey there. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Cecilia pushed herself off the wall and sauntered over to Ivan. She put her hand on Ivan's chest to stop him from closing the distance she had purposefully left between them. She met his eyes, and she knew Ivan would see the glint of humor she just cowed and hide at making Ivan wait for her. Ivan took Cecilia's hand in his and brought it up to his lips. He kissed her fingertips and briefly let his tongue trace the delicate pads. He smiled his own smile when he saw Cecilia's eyes glaze over with passion. He couldn't help but love his mate. Good morning, love. It's not a good morning yet, Cecilia whispered. She was trying to be quiet, but the passion coursing through her body deadened her voice on its own. No longer intent on making Ivan wait for her, Cecilia closed the small space between them, threw her arms around Ivan's neck, and covered his mouth with her own. She knew Ivan so well, and within only a few seconds, she had Ivan pulled into her, instead of sitting back and letting her have all the control. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. As a typical male lichen, took over the kiss, giving Cecilia everything she wanted. He knew how to please her and immediately had Cecilia moaning beneath his lips as her muscles melted against his mouth and hands. Finally, although he didn't want to, Ivan broke off the kiss. He was surprised to see Cecilia's blackened eyes as her passion took over her control. He leaned down and kissed her nose. Now I guess it's officially a good morning for you, love. If it was so much fun to watch you chase after me, I might ask for your name, Cecilia teased. You talk big, Ivan said, but you would ask for my name in a heartbeat. I just like the game as much you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Cecilia started, but she quickly lost her train of thought as Ivan moved closer to her, unwrapped his hands around her waist. She was going to shoot him some scathing remark, but his closeness had clouded her mind. Ivan leaned down and kissed Cecilia chastely on the lips. I have to bring Greta to school. He'll come find you when I come back and give you a taste of what you will get when you ask for my name at We're Bound. Cecilia stepped back from Ivan. If you can find me, perhaps he'll let you kiss me. Challenge accepted, Ivan whispered. Without another word, Ivan headed for the car where Greta was sitting in the front seat. He shared one more quick look with Cecilia before starting the vehicle and backing out the garage. His impromptu date with Cecilia was on his mind as he drove to Weston Prep. How do you know Cecilia is your mate? Greta asked, breaking into the silence. Ivan looked surprised by the question. He waited a second and then cleared his throat. In the lichen world, mates are connected by a bond that is so great that it can't be ignored by either person. We might not realize the bond is there right away, but eventually both of us will be pulled in by the bond. And Alex? Ivan stiffened his head just a bit at the question. I don't understand what you mean. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Greta said again. Does he have a mate? He does, Ivan answered vaguely. All lichens have mates. Greta sighed at the answer that wasn't really an answer. She had to know. She had lived with the oddest attraction to Alexander that she couldn't deny. And just the thought of that of Alexander with another woman boiled Greta's blood. Usually that thought was enough to prevent her from having the conversation that circled around Alexander's mate. But this morning after seeing Ivan and Cecilia together, Greta knew she couldn't wait not knowing about Alexander. Who was Alex's mate? Ivan cleared his throat and tightened and loosened his hands around the steering wheel. He should have figured that Greta was going to ask the questions concerning mates. She was as pulled to Alexander as he was to Cecilia, and Ivan knew exactly how strong that pull was. So Ivan knew the question was coming, but he really thought that Greta would have confronted Alexander about it. Not him. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, Greta said, after the silence had continued far longer than she wanted. Who is Alex's mate? I'm not allowed to talk about it, Ivan said. Alexander had forbidden him, or any Lycan in the clan, from telling Greta they were mates. Even though Greta was a leader and Alexander's mate, Alexander was Ivan's leader, and he was going to go against his leader. Why can't you talk about it? Alex has forbidden me from telling you anything about it. About mates in general, or his in particular. Greta. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Perhaps we should talk about the upcoming day and what to expect now that you'll be having the children back with. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Stop changing the subject, Greta demanded. Why has Alex forbidden you from telling me who his mate is? In not answering that, Greta felt her heart start to race and her blood course faster and faster through her veins. She knew Ivan picked up on it when he glanced over at her with a concerned look on his face. Are you okay? Who is Alex's mate? Greta, in changing the subject. Alex has forbidden this conversation. About school. There is only a few reasons that Alex would forbid you to have this conversation with me. I'm sure there's more than a few reasons. No, there is only a few. Gretel leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for only a moment. Then they flashed open. No. Now what are you denying? Ivan asked as he exited the main road to head to the school. Perhaps if he got there soon enough, Gretel wouldn't have the opportunity to ask any more questions or draw any conclusions that Alexander would not appreciate. Greta sat up ramrod straight in her seat and turned her teacher glare on Ivan. It was a glare she had perfected, and she was surprised to see Ivan actually cringe a little. And she was sure if she were Lycan and had impeccable hearing, she would have heard his heart start to race. Greta. Again she interrupted Ivan. At first I said that there were only a few reasons that Alex would have forbidden you from having the conversation with me. But I was wrong. Yes, Ivan agreed. There are lots and lots of reasons. No, Greta disagreed. There aren't lots and lots of reasons. There aren't even a few reasons. There's only one no. Yes, Greta. I'm Alex's mate. Greta paled considerably. She cleared her throat. That's it, isn't it? I'm Alex's mate. Aren't I? Lying was forbidden in the Lycan culture, and Ivan had grown up knowing never to lie. And he was going to change all that for Greta. Perhaps we should talk about Patrick and Isabella. Hoping to change the subject. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Greta, what do you want me to say? I want you to answer the question. Am I Alex's mate? I can't answer that. Ivan said. Alex has forbidden me from talking about it. You will have to ask him. Oh, I will. Greta assured Ivan. Ivan could hear the anger in Greta's voice. Luckily for him, he pulled in front of the school at the exact moment. Alex already has several of his clan here. They will watch you and the children today at school. Greta slipped out of the car and opened the back seat to get her bag of books. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You will not say anything to Alex about our conversation in the car, unless he specifically asks clarifying questions. I want to talk to Alex tonight. Ivan smiled. He wanted to be part of that conversation. There was no way he would ruin that entertainment for everyone. You have my word. Greta, I won't say anything to Alex. Now head inside. Greta waved a hand to Ivan and headed into the school. She was Alexander's mate. It was the only thing that made sense. That must be why she cowled and handled being in Alexander's presence without wanting to throw herself at him. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She saw Cecilia and Ivan together. She knew how strongly attracted mates were to each other. Alexander must have known the entire time. which would explain the small smile she would see on his face when she had a particularly hard time to stop herself from taking Alexander right then and there. And if Ivan had to be told not to talk to Greta about it, then that meant that other Lycans were probably aware of the connection between the two. Greta pulled her phone from her purse and dialed a number she hadn't called in several years. "Hello," the voice said, covered in sleep. "Scene K. You have a lot to explain," Greta demanded. Alexander was going to be happy that she contacted Scene K, but Greta really didn't care all that much. She was going to face Alexander until she had all her questions answered, and Scene K was going to be the one to answer them.